Visiting with Brad Edwards from ESPN, ESPN.com, college football analyst, talking about this college football playoff. Vince Ferrara, Brendan Quinn. What about the aspects of a committee? What do you think is the most likely characteristics of a committee to decide for these four teams?
Well, what I'm hearing right now is 15 people. I was thinking somewhere around 12 would be ideal. I think you need to have enough people that you can basically offset the biases that could possibly exist. Now, you could have the most ethical people in the world on that committee, but if they have ever been affiliated with college athletics, the fans are going to assume that if someone ever worked at or played for a Big Ten school, that they're going to vote for the Big Ten team. And same thing with the ACC, SEC, whatever. Is that the fans will assume that everyone on the committee is biased. And so if you can just set it up in a way that based on, everyone's history, based on their resume, that there is no conference out there that would seem to be more connected to the committee than any other one, then even if everybody votes the way that you expect them to, the biases are going to cancel each other out, and ultimately it's going to be decided by the people in the room who don't have any horse in the race. And that's the way it should be. And I think if they can do that, that's going to be fair. I think the big thing with the selection committee that's going to be different from basketball, and I hear so many people comparing football and basketball as if you just take the basketball concept and move it over to football and it'll be great. With basketball, they don't have all that much concern about getting the top four teams right, because if they mess them up, then somebody just ends up being a 2 seed. And in the end, what's really the big difference? And you guys know how passionate the college football fans are, and you know how sometimes they go a little bit overboard when they perceive their team to be slighted. And I don't think the people in this committee, or maybe they do, but I don't think they have any idea what they're going to be up against on probably an annual basis, as far as the types of hatred, if not physical threats, that they're going to receive from the fan bases of the teams that get left out. It will be totally different from basketball, and I just hope they're prepared for that.
Now to touch on kind of what the selection committee is actually going to be picking on, the structure itself of what they're doing. So in plain English, can you explain the 3 contract bowls and the 3 access bowls and how they're going to coexist? For instance, if the Rose Bowl is pegged as a national semifinal in a year where the Pac-10 doesn't produce a team that's picked as a top 4 team by the selection committee, what happens then? How does that play out?
Yeah, now, I haven't spoken to anybody yet about all the details. I've kind of read about it just like you have at this point. My understanding is that if the Rose Bowl is a national semifinal site, then if there is a matchup of between the 1 versus 4 and the 2 versus 3, if one of those matchups has a Big Ten or Pac-12 team and the other one does not, then that's the one the Rose Bowl would get. Now, in the years that the Rose Bowl is not hosting a national semifinal, then they will get a Big Ten versus Pac-12 matchup. If the conference champions of those 2 leagues happen to be in the top 4, both in the top 4, then they'll just take the number 2 team from each league and they'll play that game. And now, where that gets interesting is, what if the number 2 teams from those leagues are ranked 20th and 23rd? Do they still take them? Do they choose somebody else? Do they have the leverage to decide what their preference is? I don't know. And there are so many details like that still have to be sorted out. But I can tell you things are going to be different, and there will be some bowls that have contractual obligations, but others will not. And I would say that we will see significantly fewer Big East teams playing in major bowl games than we have over the last 14 years.
Brad, what about the Champions Bowl? They seem like sort of a wild card where they're not officially there, but they have a presence and could be there. Explain that if you can.
I haven't figured that one out yet. It's funny because it's so new itself as far as the concept, and it hasn't been been fully developed, at least in my mind, as to exactly how this is going to work. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious if the champions of those two leagues aren't in the 4-team playoff, they'll play each other. What happens when they are, and do they take the second-place teams if they lose the first-place teams to the playoff like the Rose Bowl does? I wish I could give you more insight to that, but I haven't seen anything that really spells it out yet.
What about the role of the BCS now? Because when the presidents got together and talked and made this decision, it was the BCS Presidential Oversight Committee. There have been BCS bowls and there's been a BCS poll. A lot of different aspects, as you well know, being the BCS guru for ESPN, there are a lot of different parts of the BCS. Talk about what the BCS's role is moving forward.
Well, the funny thing about all that is that the BCS, I guess you would say it's an organization, but really what it is, it's just a partnership of all these conferences. And so it's actually the BCS administrators are the ones who just killed the BCS, but they're the same people who are going to be running the playoff. So in some ways, nothing changed. I mean, it's still the same group of people that are organizing it. They're just no longer going to call it the BCS, and it's going to have a different format. They're going to get rid of this whole selection process with the polls and the computers, and I'm sure that the coaches poll will still exist. I'm sure the computer rankings will still exist, even though people will be paying far less attention to them. So certain things will change, but it will be the same group of people running the show. And I think one of the big problems that they faced within the BCS era is something that they're still going to have to be very conscious of, which is access to teams from the smaller conferences. And they've got to be sure that the system is set up in such a way that the Boise States of the world feel like that they have a fair opportunity. Now, fair and equal are not the same thing. They will never have an equal opportunity to get in. But I think as long as they have a reasonable chance when they have a great season to finish in the top 4 and get in the playoff, everybody's going to be fine. But I think if at some point there is a belief that this thing is structured in such a way that makes it impossible for them to compete, then you're going to have some of the same things happen that happened during the BCS era, which is people either threatening lawsuits or going to Congress, and so that part of the BCS has not necessarily gone away either.
Now, you mentioned the rankings. I've seen people making a fuss that these rankings are still going to be released week by week and saying that in some way is going to sway the potential committee members. And now, like you said, you can't really equate it to basketball. It's two very different things, but there's a coaches poll, an AP poll, and the RPI that comes out every week in college hoops. Is it even worthwhile making a big deal of the fact that there are weekly rankings coming out on the football side, or is that just
I'm kind of with you. I think that they exist for basketball. I mean, the selection committee is meeting, and there's an AP poll, there's a coaches poll, and from all evidence that exists, they don't really give them any consideration. They don't go into their thinking as to how they see that tournament, and maybe you could say that because the college football people have been so conditioned to acknowledging the polls over the years that perhaps it would have more influence on them than it would on a basketball committee. I think that's difficult to say, but the polls definitely won't go away. I mean, the AP will still release its poll. I can't imagine the coaches would stop voting. And I think the Harris poll will disappear because that was really created just for the BCS. But yeah, that'll be all. I tell you what'll be interesting to me is whether the people who run the show, whatever it ultimately ends up being called, whether they give specific instructions to the people in that committee not to give interviews, or either if they do talk to the media, not to say anything regarding their opinions of the teams. Can you imagine if we went into that final weekend when this committee convenes and nobody has the slightest hint as to the opinion of anybody on that committee as far as thinking that this team's better than this team or anything of that nature? I think it would be quite a dramatic weight for that final announcement if we didn't have any lean as to which way this thing was going to go.
Well, Brad, last thing, and we really appreciate your time on that subject. What is realistic? And you've written about it and talked about it before. What is realistic to expect in terms of transparency with that committee?
There have been people, and I don't think they were involved, with the conference commissioners or any of these meetings that have taken place who have suggested that maybe you could televise the meetings, or maybe it's just a web broadcast or something where people wanted to see what was going on in the room and hear the conversation, they could. I wouldn't say that that's ridiculous given where we are in the world of reality TV and all that, but I wouldn't expect it to happen. Yeah, certainly you're not going to know. I don't expect that we're going to know everything that's said. I don't think we're necessarily going to know who in the room voted for which teams. But I personally am comfortable with a committee as far as the level of transparency, just because I know there are going to be fans out there who will believe that somebody was in there trying to round everybody up and let's make sure this team doesn't get in or whatever. That stuff doesn't happen in a committee like this, because if someone had an agenda and they were trying to get everyone together and one person in the room disagrees with them, that person's going to rat them all out to the media when they come out of the meeting. And so that stuff's not going to happen, and I'm perfectly fine with not knowing exactly who voted for whom, as long as I think we have the right people in the committee.
Brad Edwards from ESPN, ESPN.com, so many other outlets with the network, BCS analyst for quite a long time. Maybe the specifics of the title for Brad might have changed, but still will be.
We'll see.
Hey, Brad, really appreciate it. Great to visit with you as always. Have a great rest of the week.
Thanks. You guys too.
Thanks. Brad Edwards. You can find him on Twitter, Brad Edwards _BCS.